I must say, if you don't mind me saying, nothing screams confidence in the deal you've negotiated like slipping it onto your website after midnight. I will not address every element of the deal the Secretary of State has highlighted today. On some, we will have to reserve judgment until we have seen the full treaty text and the economic impact assessment. After all, Mr. Speaker, this was the Secretary of State who agreed a brand new Japan deal, which turned out, according to her own figures, to deliver lower benefits for Britain than the one that we already had. However, the one area of this deal where we can reach a verdict now are the terms agreed on agriculture. And in doing so, Mr. Speaker, I am not going to hold the Secretary of State to some impossible ideal. I'm simply going to hold her to the past commitments she has made to protect our standards and protect our farming industry. So let us start with standards. The Secretary of State said last October that she would not sign a trade deal which would allow British farmers to be undercut by cheap imports produced using practices that are allowed in other countries but banned in the UK. She called that an important principle. So let me just give her 10 examples of such practices in Australia: allowing slurry to pollute rivers, using growth-promoting antibiotics, housing hens in battery cages, trimming their beaks with hot blades, mulesing young lambs, keeping pregnant pigs in sow stalls, branding cattle with hot irons, dehorning and spraying them without pain relief, and routinely transporting livestock for 48 hours without rest, food or water. All practices in common use in Australia, all practices banned in Britain. And yet, under the deal that she has signed, the meat from farms that use those practices will come into our country tariff-free, undermining British standards, undercutting British farmers and breaking the promises made to the British people. So much for protecting our standards. What about protecting our farming industry? The Secretary of State said last November, "We have no intention of ever striking a deal that doesn't benefit our farmers." And yet, the deal that she has just signed will allow Australia's farm corporations to export more than 60 times the amount of beef next year as they exported to Britain last year, before they pay a single penny in tariffs. It is the equivalent of immediate, unlimited, tariff-free trade, which is why the Secretary of State, when the Secretary of State says Australian farmers will be in the same position as EU farmers after 15 years, she is talking nonsense. They will be in exactly the same position from year one, but without the requirement to meet EU standards. No wonder Australia's former negotiator at WTO has said, and I quote, "I don't think we've ever done as well as this. Getting rid of all tariffs, all quotas forever is virtually an unprecedented result." And of course he's right, Mr. Speaker. When Japan and Korea negotiated their deals with Australia, they set tariff-free allowances in year one, which allowed for a modest increase from the amount of beef Australia had exported to them in the previous year. 7% for Korea, 10% for Japan. By comparison, the Secretary of State has just signed a deal which allows Australia to increase exports of beef by 6,000% without paying any tariffs. And, Mr. Speaker, in the government's own scoping paper last July, we have it in black and white. That increase in Australian exports will mean, and I quote, "a fall in output and employment in the UK's agriculture sector." British farmers, the Honourable Lady says it's wrong. I'm just quoting her department. British farmers left worse off as a result of her deal. Another broken promise and more to come when New Zealand, Canada, Brazil and America demand the same deal from their exports. Mr. Speaker, let me be absolutely clear. We want good trade deals with other countries. We want trade deals that will create jobs, support our industries, strengthen our economy, strengthen our recovery. But to be blunt about it, we want the same kind of results for our trade deals that Australia has just achieved from us. In closing, Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State told the newspapers in April that she would sit her inexperienced Australian counterpart in an uncomfortable chair and show him how to play at this level. I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, this deal has exposed the Secretary of State as the one who is not up to the job. And Britain needs and deserves better. We need someone who will keep the promises they make to the public and to Parliament, someone who will promote British standards around the world, not allow them to be undermined, someone who will protect our farming and steel industries, not throw them to the wolves, someone who will get the results for their country that the Australian Trade Minister has delivered for his. The Secretary of State has shown that she is not that person, so there is only one question that matters today. Will she guarantee to give Parliament not just a debate, but a binding vote on the deal that she has agreed with Australia so that we can reject the terms that she has agreed on farming and send someone else back to the table to get a better deal for our country?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's not a surprise that the Honourable Lady is relentlessly negative about the opportunities of the Australia deal and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I'm surprised that she's known as the Secretary of State or the Shadow Secretary of State for International Trade. She should be known as the Shadow Secretary of State against international trade, because there's not a single trade deal that she supports. She had nothing to say about the tariff-free access for all British goods, from cars to whisky, that we are going to secure under this agreement. She had nothing to say about the benefits for the under-35s of being able to live and work in Australia for 3 years with no strings attached. She had nothing to say about digital and services, even though the UK is the second largest services exporter in the world. Instead, she talked about agriculture, which is a new interest for her, because we haven't really heard her say much about it in the past. Let me be clear, Mr. Speaker. In year one, the cap on Australian exports to the UK in beef will be 35,000 tonnes of beef. Now, we currently import 230,000 tonnes from the EU. So the cap is 15% of what we currently import from the EU. That is not the same access that the EU have. It's only 15% of the access. In fact, Australian farmers will only have the same access as the EU in 2036. And she talks about animal welfare standards, Mr. Speaker. Australia has been rated 5 out of 5 in international ratings on animal welfare standards. And in many cases, Mr. Speaker, those animal welfare standards are higher than they are in the EU. But not once, Mr. Speaker, did the Honourable Lady complain about the zero tariff, zero quota deal from the EU. Not once has she talked about animal welfare standards in the EU, apart from claiming that she likes Danish pork. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that the lady opposite simply wants to stay in the EU. She doesn't want to look at the future opportunities. She's not interested in where Britain can go in the future. And she is not interested in expanding Britain's trade and delivering more jobs in this country.